Hi all and welcome to another week of the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. A fairly comprehensive roundup of the news and views around the world with plenty of insights, and we're going to peel back some raw layers again. Now, in the recent show called Done, I asked a question about the cost of sleeping bags. And I'm rather pleased that I received a satisfactory explanation for the gap in costs and also donations, and so I'm happy to strike that question, not statement, from further discourse and move on. So thanks to those who came forward and answered that question, but I do find it slightly odd that when I ask a question it is deemed attacking. And yet myself and TRI is scrutinised questions every minute detail, and that is not deemed attacking. Why the discrepancy in the narrative? There were several bogus claims within that show with zero proof, and a fair total character assassination, and yet no one questioned it or on him, to my knowledge. And yet I asked one question and it was labelled as an attack and grossly unfair. I guess that's just the way it is. Now, our show is mired in standing for the truth, not hopium or bullshit. There are plenty of and for that throughout the alt media for people to gorge themselves on. And alt media is no different now to Facebook in their stance. The truth goes against community standards, they say. I would argue it goes against communist standards. And communists are not Russian or Chinese, but Zionists. THI will continue to bring the truth and what is based in reality to the best of our knowledge and abilities, and it will never sway from the path of that, despite attempts from within the community to take us down. Our mission and purpose has not changed because one person decided to not fund us. We go on together. It is the only way. With the recent Vice President debates now out the way, it can be said that debates are a format for two people to compete with each other on who can speak the loudest, who interrupts more, and who can lie to the public more. Which one makes more woo-woo promises, none of which will be delivered to the people? Trump promised to build the wall. It's not done. Trump promised to delete student loans, according to the trustee. It's not done. Make America great again. It's not done. But how many times did each politician discuss policies to aid the people and deliver on them? And all this while federal, state and law enforcement officials have been bracing for possible clashes at local polling stations, violence and larger demonstrations similar to the summer-long social justice protests that spilled onto the streets of dozens of American cities. The BBC continue, courtesy of MI5 and MI6, to run slanted and biased commentaries on the US elections and candidates, fact-checking every word Trump says. Really? Now, if only that applied to everyone, eh? Trump this week did his rising as the new Jesus Christ act and returned from certain death from a fake virus after 3 days. Is it Easter yet? New York City slapped over 62 people, businesses and houses of worship with over $150,000 in fines during the first weekend of the newly imposed fascist COVID-19 restrictions against gatherings. Doesn't seem to affect politicians, but there you go. As well as a mask mandate and social distancing requirements, according to their Twitter account, spelt with an A in the middle. Now, the best thing to do about that place is to move out altogether and let the clowns fine and harvest each other. Why is Cuomo still not arrested for killing the elderly in care homes? Mr. Trump? Life Force Enforcement Team, where are you? Now, New York officials say that large gatherings and poor adherence to social distancing recommendations have resulted in a surge of new cases. Yeah, right. And many of them in the Orthodox Jewish neighbourhoods, which resulted in targeted restrictions on large gatherings and non-essential businesses. Like I have repeatedly said, they care not for the average Jewish people. Speaking of New York and Jewish, does anyone know when the Jeffrey Epstein funeral will be? It's been over a year now, and yet no funeral. A bit like the Rothschilds, really. Facebook this week decided that the title End Child Trafficking Now goes against community standards. Like I said earlier, it goes against those who have treated children as sacrifice tools for many thousands of years. All hail Solomon, Herod, Esther, Samael and Lilith. Meanwhile, the Republican online fundraising platform endorsed by Mr. Trump reported on Monday that it raised $623.5 million in the third quarter. Biden collected $383 million in September alone. That's $1 billion for 4 months of donations for a 2-person closed voting system, whilst millions starve in this country. Have you all lost your minds? And this is as over 13,000 Utah voters received mail-in ballots without a designated area to write a signature. Jackassery at its finest. The US elections must go down, and alongside the saying, you couldn't organise a piss-up in a brewery. We have an ego-headed return from Christ after 3 days game show host, the opposition who doesn't know whether he's running for presidency or Senate, and the Speaker of the House who can't speak. Is this the best America has on offer? But then again, the UK has a spitting image puppet in charge, Russia has a multiple double in charge, Germany has a Nazi in charge, South Africa has a genocidal maniac in charge, and China has the invisible man in charge, while South Asia has a series of royals in charge, and Down Under has Pine Gap in charge. And we the people wonder why the world is in a mess. And the now global milligram experiment of all bow to authority, regardless of legitimacy, sanity, validity, without questioning or even a thinking process to do with the masks, just keeps on rolling. As one alt-media personality now takes on the role of a Jewish icon, who is not even Jewish anyway, a common theme now, who in a past life was a former consort of Marduk. I guess that is the thing with time. Right, after that rapid-fire opening, we're going to get into some topics, politics and news from around the world, before we get into the deeper exposés later in the show. So, in a normal election year, in any given state, hundreds or even thousands of absentee ballots get tossed for everything from late postmarks to open envelopes. Now, North Carolina rejected 546 ballots for missing witness signatures, which is probably why Utah sent 13 out where you didn't have a box to sign in. And that was in the 2012 presidential race. Virginia, no surprise, tossed 216 ballots in the 2018 midterms because they arrived in an unofficial envelope. Arizona discarded 1,516 ballots for non-matching signatures the same year. The 2020 presidential election will not be normal. I guess that it should have been cancelled a long time ago. Absentee ballot rejections this November are projected to reach historic levels, risking widespread disenfranchisement of the minority voters and the credibility of election results. This is according to a journalism investigation and a PBS series Frontline investigation. Now, at least 1.03 million absentee ballots could be tossed if half of the nation votes by mail. Discarded votes jump to 1.55 million if 75% of the country votes absentee. Now, in the latter scenario, more than 185,000 votes could be lost in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, states considered key to capturing the White House. And these numbers were said to be conservative and based on 2016 rejection rates when fewer voters submitted absentee ballots. Now, a record number of voters will be voting absentee for the first time in 2020, and voters new to vote by mail are at great risk of making mistakes. The first one is the result is on the outside of the envelope. Oh dear. And if errors push the rejection rate up to just 2%, about 2.15 million votes would be cast aside, which is roughly the population of New Mexico. Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania rejected about 60,000 votes in primaries earlier this year, according to the Amherst College law professor Lawrence Douglas, and only a few thousand votes shy of Trump's margin of victory in those states in 2016. And he said a result like this in November could cast doubt on who actually carried the key swing states, with the overall election hanging in the balance. And he added that such an outcome could trigger a chaotic welter of lawsuits and clashing conspiracy theories, all designed to keep the Milgram people distracted, in my opinion. The House non-speaker, Nancy Pelosi, decided to become a bit unhinged this week, to much hilarity, when the Clinton News Network host, Wolf Blitzer, pressed her on why she hadn't agreed to a compromise fake COVID-19 relief bill, and going so far as to call the network apologists for the Republican position. Now, on Tuesday, the outburst, which provided much comic relief for critics of CNN's anti-Trump and anti-conservative bias, came as Blitzer grilled Pelosi, which someone would, on why she hasn't come to agreement with Republicans on economic relief legislation after the Trump administration offered a $1.8 trillion package. Now, the interview went off the rails as Blitzer pointed out that some House Democrats wanted to accept the proposal, citing a tweet by Democrat Representative Ro Khanna, saying the offer was more than double that Barack Obama economic stimulus program in 2009. And Khanna said the people in need cannot wait until February, referencing when relief checks might go out if the issue is tabled until after the November the 3rd election. So it said people in need can't wait till February. 1.8 is significant and more than twice the Obama stimulus, and it will allow Biden to start with infrastructure. Now, Obama won in 2008 by doing the right thing on top instead of what was expedient, making a deal and put the ball in McConnell's court, according to Khanna. But Blitzer persisted, pointing out that millions of Americans have lost their jobs and can't pay their rent or buy food for their families. He said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and cited a conversation with former Democrat presidential candidate Andrew Yang, who also favours compromise. And Pelosi then lost it. Honest to God, I can't get over it. Andrew Yang, he's lovely. Ro Khanna, he's lovely. That wasn't a question, Pelosi, you idiot. They're not negotiating this situation. They have no idea of the particulars. And she then told Blitzer that you really don't know what you're talking about, and said he needs to show some level of respect to the people who have worked on the legislation. Well, so-called politicians are pretending to be acting as caring for the American people, spouting utter crap, and hold the people to hostage for votes. The carnage of America will continue to rot. Republican and Democrat has not worked for America. And at which point do the masses not see through that? Politics is theatre and illusion for the absurd. Blackrock, Black Sun, Black Eagle, Black Star Trust, all the same group, made the headlines again this week with Blackrock nabs $460 million in EFT, which is a transfer, as Mexico goes green. The Mexican pension funds are funneling money towards a new socially responsible ETF and demanding local companies offer more data on how they are handling the environment, social and governance issues. Blackrock Inc. shares ESG MSI Mexico ETF has seen more than 460 million inflows since its launch at the end of July, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Now, during the same period, investors dumped about 350 million of the iShares that had been favoured by local pensions, or Afores, to bet on the benchmark Mexpol index. One has to ask the question, is this the Mexico money the trustee sent? We would welcome some clarity, please. More financial troubles, this time in China. China's government is expected to price a potential $6 billion bond sale this week ahead of possible volatility from the US elections next month. The Ministry of Finance is arranging investors' calls for a 144A and Regulation S senior bonds on Tuesday, and according to people familiar with the matter who aren't authorised to speak publicly. And the ministry is seeking to raise about $6 billion via multi-tranche notes that will likely include 3, 5-year, 10-year and 30-year maturities. And officials at the ministry weren't available to comment. Now, the planned bond sale follows the ministry's jumbo global debt offerings in 2 currencies in November, when it sold $6 billion of bonds and $4 billion in euro notes, and the former drew bumper demand with orders at more than triple the targeted size. Now, China's fresh sovereign debt sale this week comes as uncertainty ahead of the elections is beginning to weigh on investment or investor sentiment, with some analysts anticipating a pickup in volatility. I guess they're expecting a massive slide in America and Europe's currencies based on a stupid election that should have been cancelled months ago. But with this news, it suggests harsh financial times ahead, I suspect. Remember the story of the clown of Israel, Netanyahu, and his UN address recently, where he was pointing out another region in Beirut. And then, lo and behold, this week, a fuel tank has exploded in a densely populated area of the Lebanese capital, Beirut, killing at least 4 people and injuring 20. It's likely to be more. And the blast occurred after the tank caught fire in Tariq al-Jadid district, and TV footage showed flames leaping up buildings in the area's narrow streets. There is no word on the cause of the fire, and rescue efforts were ongoing. Now, the blast caused panic in a city scarred by the explosion that killed 203 people in the port area in August. And the latest fire and explosion also comes amid a severe financial crisis due to the fake virus pandemic, which have fueled widespread discontent. Now, on Friday, firefighters used ladders to scale the outside of apartment buildings to rescue residents from their balconies. And there was much panic in Beirut again. Another of Netanyahu's prophecies comes to fruition. Is he Esther as well? Israel, and the people of Israel, which you won't hear on CNN, or the BBC for that matter, or Sky for that matter. The people of Israel have flocked to the streets to decry the government's ban on mass demonstrations, which they see as a distraction from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial. And the rather noisy gathering ended up in scuffles with the police. Now, according to the reports, the crowd, numbering hundreds, it was actually thousands, amassed in Tel Aviv when night fell on Tuesday, carrying homemade placards that demanded the resignation of Netanyahu. Others were seen waving flags and chanting slogans in unison. And at some point the demonstration became chaotic, although police began to get things under control. Officers, some armed, some wearing riot gear, didn't deploy any crowd control measures but used their hands to push protesters away. Not exactly what I was told, they weren't. And demonstrators flocked to the streets in defiance of new measures passed last week, which prohibit Israelis from travelling more than a kilometre from where they live to protest, and limit rallies to a social distance group of just 20 people. The irony of the alleged victims of fascism carrying it out on their own populace will not be lost on our listeners. And we're still with the clowns of Israel and the latest attempt to harvest countries and take over their rule. This time Sudan, which is in fairly desperate straits at the moment, a collapsing economy, hyperinflation looming, and a nationwide food crisis. And the administration of US President Donald Trump and the Israeli government have now seen an opportunity, a bit like what happened to the United Arab Emirates. The country's democratic hopes hang by a thread 18 months after a non-violent protest overthrew their long-term ruler Omar al-Bashir. But if Sudan recognises Israel, then the US will strike it off the state sponsors of terrorists. Really? If Sudan recognises Israel, then the US will strike it off the state sponsors of terrorists. Opening the door, it says, to essential economic stabilisation measures. I would call that bribe. There you go. Now, after seizing power in a military coup in 1989, President Bashir turned Khartoum, it said, into a global centre for militant jihadism. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups, which are all run by the CIA, used Sudan as the base for carrying out terror attacks in the US, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya and elsewhere. But after the first terror attack on New York's World Trade Center in 1993, the US designated Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism. Sudan, really? You'll have a laugh. International financial sanctions and military pressure from neighbouring countries which supported Sudanese rebels pushed Sudan to expel Osama bin Laden, who was actually in Afghanistan, not Sudan, and other jihadists 3 years later. Now, shortly after the September 11, 2001 attacks, Sudan's security services became a valued partner with the CIA. And on that basis, Sudan should have been removed from the state-sponsored list of terror. And the Bashir government still operated in the shadows. It kept open its links, they say, to Iran and Hamas, who are run by Israel, just saying. And on at least 2 occasions, Israeli fighter planes attacked convoys travelling up Sudan's Red Sea coast, allegedly taking arms to Hamas. Now, in 2016, under pressure from Saudi Arabia, which is another Israeli puppet, and the United Arab Emirates, which is the latest Israeli puppet, the Bashir government cut its ties with Iran, yet after the democratic revolution last year, Washington, D.C. was slow to shift. And the problem was that keeping sanctions on Sudan could easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy, condemning the country to state failure. And as long as Sudan stays blacklisted, crippling financial sanctions stay in place, and the legitimate Sudanese businesses are handicapped, foreign direct investment is shackled, and the IMF and World Bank cannot adopt a package to relieve its massive debt, which is 72 billion and counting. The 72 billion and counting is because of the IMF and World Bank. That's what they do to countries. But now, the 3-day saviour man is offering Sudan a way out. Visiting Khartoum at the end of August, Secretary of Deep State Mike Pompeo proposed a deal to Sudan's civil Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok that if Sudan recognised Israel, President Trump would circumvent the congressional bloc. Are we here to make America great again, or Israel great? They've never been, I'm not saying again, because they've never been great for anybody. Why is all the diplomatic meetings going on with United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and now Sudan, all for the benefit of Israel? And yes, that is a common sense question. Now, following the United Arab Emirates decision last month, Sudan, a member of the Arab League, would only be the 5th Arab state to do so. And the point is, the caliphate that I warned of back in 2013 is now taking shape. You decide. But look at the map. Only Iran is the barrier to India, it seems. And yet again, this is involving the CIA and more skullduggery. President Truman, it was, who set up the CIA. And he was asked by Merle Miller, Mr. President, I know that you were responsible as the president for setting up the CIA. How do you feel about it now? And Truman said, I think it was a mistake. And if I'd known what was going to happen, I would never have done it. Hear, hear. We're off to, I'm talking about the CIA, we're now off to Virginia. And Virginia's entire voter registration system has been felled this week by a rogue cable, according to the state's infotech agency, which blamed an, quote, accidentally cut, quote, unquote, line for an outage that may stop procrastinators from voting altogether. Now, the citizen portal that allows Virginian residents to register online to vote in the 2020 election was knocked out on Tuesday morning, the last day state residents were allowed to register. And that was according to the Virginia Board of Elections has revealed posting notices to its website and Twitter account. Next common sense question. I wonder if you can ponder hard, I'll ponder very hard now, on which group may have cut that cable from Virginia. We're going to the UK next. And we're going to take a close look at the lifestyles of UK politicians, shall we? Although they are no better or different from any other politician in any other country. Self-serving, pocket puppet of lobbyists and intelligence agencies that negotiate themselves seats on boards of top companies, involved in corruption, and many others involved in more heinous levels of crime. Often out of bloodline or elite families, some inbred for that very purpose, and often involved in secret societies, and altogether out of touch with reality. That's the definition of a politician. Or perhaps the new term for the description of a politician for 2020 should read parasite. So apart from all that, what else do they actually do? Discuss policies, vote on bills for improvements of the general public, fix the homeless or poverty issues, come up with curriculums that improve children, shut down dangerous health-related organisations, deal with police violence or any violence, ensure the legal system is fair, are just some of the requirements that people would look from and with a politician. But do they do any of that? No. And we're back to the start of the pocket puppet of the lobbyists, agency puppet and parasite. Now here is a list of perks a UK politician gets and what they claim and get back on top of their salaries. Their pensions are paid, and also paid positions sitting on boards of top companies, or the correct term, lobbyists. They get all food and drink expenses back, travel expenses, second homes, the decorating of the second home, gardening, furniture, office stationery, the council, or we would know it as property taxes paid, and household bills are just some of the reimbursements of the UK politicians. And you know what the problem is about all of this is? Us. We the people, as we do not make these people accountable to look after our money. And remember, the governments don't have any money, they have our money. It's a bit like the banks. But we vote for these parasites. Good news this week, following a week-long human trafficking sting by the FBI, has led to the arrest of 28 men in South Reno, Nevada. And according to the FBI's Northern Nevada Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force, all 28 suspects arrived at a home in South Reno to knowingly engage in and pay for sex acts with a minor, as identified through the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. Now, the FBI-funded operation identified 7 men on its first night, Monday, October the 5th. 8 men were arrested on Tuesday the 6th and 5 on Wednesday the 7th, and 8 men were arrested on Thursday the 8th. All suspects were arrested on felony accounts of soliciting a child for prostitution and attempted child abuse, and some of the suspects are facing additional charges. Reno, the home of the fake currency revaluation crew. Fitting, if you ask me, and yes, there is connections. We're going to Mexico next, before we go into a different subject, and a fairly disturbing story from Mexico. 3 police officers were wounded during a gun battle on Monday in Calera, Zacatecas, in which 14 armed civilians were killed, according to the Security Minister Arturo Lopez Baltazar. Now, police were carrying out tactical operations in the municipality located 29 kilometers from the state capital when they were attacked by gunmen. Now, of the 3 officers injured, 2 had shrapnel wounds and 1 suffered a gunshot wound, but all were reported to be in stable condition. Now, authorities seized 3 of the assailants' vehicles as well as an arsenal of weapons that included 8 rifles and a grenade launcher. Ammunition and drugs were also seized. Now, Lopez said the police presence in Zacatecas has increased to include ground and air patrols, and vowed the state would spare no resources to restore order and tranquility. Now, unfortunately, some of these statistics are staggering. The violent attack was not an isolated case. On October the 5th, just meters across the border in San Luis Potosi, 12 bodies were discovered, bringing the total to 21 dumped at the site recently and 46 for the year. Most have been found in Villa de Ramos and Venegas, which is bordering Zacatecas, and authorities suspect gangs there, most likely the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels, are using the region as a body dump. Now, officials from both states plan to meet to discuss how to better coordinate public safety issues, but Monday's gun battle comes on the heels of the most violent weekend in Mexico's history. Official numbers show that between Friday and Sunday, there was 273 murders throughout the country, with 114 occurring on Sunday alone. 34 people were killed in Guanajuato, 34 in the state of Mexico, 26 in Jalisco, 16 in Chihuahua, 14 in Puebla, and 11 in Mexico City. Now, previously, the most violent weekend on record was Father's Day, which is in June, I think, when 265 people were murdered between the 19th and the 21st of June. Now, last week, Federal Security Minister Alfonso Durazo assured Mexicans that we have progressively left behind the blackest days of insecurity, and claimed that the day is near when we will see ourselves walking in the streets free of fear. And some people wonder why a wall needed to be built. All these gangs, and I mean all of them, by and large were bought and paid for by American tax dollars, courtesy of the CIA, and the likes of Eric Holder with Operation Fast and Furious. Remember the alt media cry? And all of them said he was going to be arrested for that, Holder and Fast and Furious. That was 2011. And like the modern day equivalent of the Wilcock and Drake show with Q, it just hasn't happened yet, has it? Where are we next. Military and technology. Here we go. The US military has partnered with more than a dozen companies for, quote, large-scale experimentation with 5G technology, including efforts to enhance the lethality of certain systems in what's slated to be a $600 million project. One has to ask, where did the funds come from? Dubbing 5G tech a foundational enabler for all US defense modernization, the Pentagon announced the massive research initiative last week, which will hand hundreds of millions to 15 private contractors, we'll have more on them later, to conduct testing at 5 US military installations. Now, the Pentagon adding it would bring together experts from several industries and disciplines, said in a statement, today the Department of Defense announced $600 million in awards for 5G experimentation and testing at the 5 military sites, representing the largest full-scale 5G tests for dual-purpose or dual-use applications in the world. 600 million and the people are starving. That's 600 million. Was it 1.8 trillion that Trump offered for the stimulus? Well, if he added that 600 million, that would appease what the Democrats wanted. But no, we're going to give it to the war machine again. Our money. And projects will include piloting 5G-enabled augmented virtual reality, oh dear, for mission planning and training, testing 5G-enabled smart warehouses and evaluating 5G technologies to enhance distributed command and control. Now, the firms selected for the project are all the usual clown operators, includes the telecoms AT&T, Nokia and Ericsson, intelligence and infotech contractor Booz Allen Hamilton, the research wing of General Electric, Zeke Heil, GE Research and a subsidiary of aerospace giant General Dynamics. Now, while efforts spearheaded by AT&T at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada will apply 5G to distributed command and control systems in order to aid in air, space and, quote, cyberspace lethality, unquote, enhancing communications for mobile command centers in combat scenarios. Now, a Washington State Joint Base Lewis McChord, AT&T will also work alongside Booz Allen and 2 other firms to develop 5G-enabled virtual reality technology for training, mission planning, and even, quote, operational use, unquote, though the Pentagon provided no examples of the latter application. Indeed. Now, the costly initiative will also see testing carried out at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, a Marine Corps logistic facility in Georgia, and California's Naval Base San Diego, where the companies will develop smart warehousing systems, no doubt for Amazon, and work to integrate 5G cell networks with Air Force radars. I'm going to repeat that last bit again. And work to integrate 5G cell networks with Air Force radars. The rapid growth of 5G technology has stoked controversy not only amongst the conspiracy-minded, it said, but in the realms of geopolitics as well. And the Pentagon's vast new project comes amid an ongoing spat between the US government and the Chinese telecom Huawei over its 5G services, which Washington has banned outright while pressuring a number of European allies to do the same. Now, US officials insist that the company poses a threat to both privacy and national security. No, it poses a threat to Langley. Despite Huawei's repeated denials that its systems are not used for data theft or espionage on behalf of Beijing. Now, what this all amounts to is, and why they're blocking Huawei and then rolling out this program, they blocked Huawei to give themselves time because they're light years behind everybody else, you see, particularly in the military. This whole 5G thing is about a power grab between the clowns of the East and the clowns of the West. And our tax dollars are paying for this stupidity. Final piece before we go into a music break. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has now entered into a partnership with the US Department of Defense, and their ambitious plan is to develop a means to deliver 80 tons of cargo anywhere in the world in 60 minutes or less. Rapid deployment. And Musk has also contracted to build missile tracking satellites for the USAF. So much for Elon Musk being a good guy, as some bizarrely believe in the alt media. We'll be back shortly. Right, the next category we're going into is food issues. And researchers in Washington State this week have again failed to live track a massive murder hornet, with the fearsome bug going fugitive as local officials attempt to locate and destroy their nests before the insect bee killing season begins. A key line: these murder hornets kill off the bees. Now, the latest tracking attempt saw a public entomologist with Washington State Department of Agriculture fix a tracking device to a female Asian giant hornet, better known by its more intimidating moniker, the murder hornet. But the bug made a break into the forest and the device went dark. Why are they putting it on the device, not just killing it? Now, the teams and neighbours tracked the hornet from tree to tree for about an hour before losing her signal in the forest, according to the department update on Monday. And both staff and several neighbours spent the remainder of the afternoon searching the area for the tracking signal, which would transmit for approximately 12 hours, but unfortunately it could not be located. Now, the previous attempt to track one of the aggressive arthropods, which is the largest wasp on Earth, measuring up to 2 inches in length. 2 inches. Failed after a tracking device detached from the creature before it returned to its nest. Now, more recent efforts used dental floss to attach the device instead of glue, but it still didn't work. Now, whilst the insect sting has been known to be fatal to human beings, deadly encounters with people are somewhat rare. But the bug's nickname instead comes from its tendency to wipe out honeybee nests on a seasonal basis, and what Spicager termed its slaughter phase, which he noted is now drawing near. Now, this bug is native to Asia, and only around 18 of the hornets have been spotted in Washington since they were first detected last year near the US border with Canada. No surprise. However, their devastating attacks on beehives makes them a potentially serious pest, prompting the search and destroy efforts by local officials. Now, one has to ask, here we go, common sense questions again. Is this insect genetically modified for war against peoples and countries? And the reason being, with the large Asian gang-related populace just across the border in Vancouver, and we'll cover more on that later, one does wonder if these insects are being used and placed deliberately to damage America's food supply. And it also proves they have devices small enough to fit on insects and use them as target devices, which I believe one was used 2 years ago that hit Kim in the just below her eye. That thing didn't look real, and it's not. Now, after I warned of it in the spring of last year, here now comes the proof of that prediction of the food shortage with this report. And it says in 2020 we are witnessing an explosion of hunger in the United States that is unlike anything that we've seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Tens of millions of Americans have lost their jobs since the start of this fake pandemic, and money is running low for a whole lot of people. And there's an article about a survey that found out that 1 of every 5 Americans will be out of cash by election day. 20%. And that more Americans are slipping into poverty with each passing month, and this has created an unprecedented surge of demand at food banks across the nation. Meanwhile, our growing economic problems are causing donations to dry up, and so many food banks are facing a major crunch as we head into 2021. In fact, Feeding America is warning that their network of food banks is potentially facing a, quote, 8 billion meal shortage, unquote, 8 billion meals short over the next 12 months. And the dire shortage comes as tens of millions of Americans have turned to local food banks for help amid the pandemic-triggered surge in unemployment and also food insecurity. But how in the world are we going to make up 8 billion meals shortfall? Is the question they asked. Well, I have a solution for that, and we'll have it shortly. And of course, that number assumes that things won't get dramatically worse in our society next year. And if they do, the true number could end up being far greater, according to the Food or Feeding America people. Like I said, this should greatly alarm all of us, because food banks are the last resort for millions upon millions of desperate Americans. Now, in 2019, approximately 35 million Americans were dealing with food insecurity. But thanks to this fake pandemic, Feeding America now expects that number to rise to 54 million, 1 in 6. One has to ask, where is the trustee? And what are they going to do about this? Now, some will say that comment is not fair. But I will say, I was not the one who stated we are the all singing, all dancing and the only doing group either. Because if you make out you are the only saviours, the people will expect you to save us. You can't have it both ways. But whilst money is being sent to Israel for fake PPEs and money's going missing in Mexico, what about the actual American people? You know, I'm sure she's trying, but these questions have to be answered, as why haven't the American people been funded? Now, the simple solution to this is both Trump and Biden give away half of their current campaign donations back to the food banks, which is estimated at around $500 million. At least that way, that money will be put to some proper use. Next, we come to social media issues. And as night follows day, we knew it was coming. Facebook this week has explicitly banned Holocaust denial for the first time. And the social network said its new policy prohibits any content that denies or distorts the Holocaust. Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg, with the silent F, wrote that he had struggled with the tension between free speech and banning such posts, but that this is the right balance. Now, 2 years ago, Zuckerberg, with a silent F, said that such posts should not automatically be taken down for, quote, getting it wrong, unquote. He said, I'm Jewish. Go figure. No shit, Sherlock. And there's a set of people who denied that the Holocaust happened. He told Recode, whoever that is, in an interview this week. And he said, I find it deeply offensive, but at the end of the day, I don't believe that our platform should take that down, because I think there are things that different people get wrong. I don't think that they're intentionally getting it wrong. Now, his remarks led to a large public backlash. But on Monday, as Facebook changed its policies, he wrote that he had changed his mind. My own thinking has evolved. I wouldn't describe you as evolved, Mr. Zuckerberg, with a silent F. As I've seen data showing an increase in anti-Semitic violence, as have our wider policies on hate speech, he wrote in a public Facebook post. But the drama, guilt and pity programme that keeps running now for almost 80 years just keeps rolling on. Here's some common sense questions. Where is the Rus and Aryan Holocaust of 80 to 90 million museums? Where is the Armenian museums? Where are the EU and American museums, Mr. Weasel? Where are the museums for the millions of death by starvation for the Africans or the Indians? And where are the museums for all the sacrificed children in the Jewish Solomon and Herod temples? One death is enough in any war, but this repeated guilt-tripping programme has to stop. The real Holocaust was done to the Rus and the Aryan and the Slavonic people, 80 to 90 million people. not 6. And to Mr. Zuckerberg with a silent F, the truth never fears investigation. So whilst they're doing that, here's another Facebook problem. A report that came out this week stated that Facebook is responsible for 94% of 69 million child sex abuse images reported by US tech firms. I guess that doesn't go against community standards. And the figures emerge as the UK is among 7 nations warning of the impact of end-to-end encryption on public safety online. Now, Facebook has previously announced plans to fully encrypt communications in its Messenger app, as well as its Instagram direct service on top of WhatsApp, which is already encrypted, meaning no one apart from the sender and the recipient can read or modify the messages. And if you believe that, you will believe anything. There is no such thing as encrypted. There are backdoors in everything. Encryption was built by Langley and the NSA, with lots of backdoors. And the social media site said the changes are designed to improve user privacy on all of its platforms. Yeah, right. But law enforcement agencies fear the move will have a devastating impact on their ability to target pedophiles and protect children online. Yeah, right, again. Yet more drivel. Where were the law enforcement agencies when Jimmy Savile, Jeffrey Epstein, Pedosta and cohorts were doing that shit? So I don't think encryption is going to make a blind bit of difference. And I guess this is why they banned a page this week titled End Child Trafficking Now. Now, some 16.9 million referrals were made by US tech firms to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children last year, including 69 million images of children being abused, which was up 50% on the previous year, and some 94% of the reports, which include the worst category of images, came from Facebook. And people are doing what about it? Why is it Facebook? And largely sexual images of children. It's fairly simple. Because the porn industry is run by the Jewish is why. Go and check it out for yourselves. Race issues. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit Thursday against Yale University alleging the school violated federal civil rights law by discriminating against Asian American and white applicants in undergraduate admissions. And in a complaint filed in a federal district court in Connecticut, the Justice Department alleged that for the past few decades, Yale's oversized, standardless, intentional use of race has subjected domestic, non-transfer applicants to Yale College to discrimination on the grounds of race. Now, the lawsuit marks an escalation of the Trump administration's scrutiny of elite colleges over their policies on race and admissions. Now, the Justice Department has also supported legal efforts to end affirmative action at Harvard University, and the Education Department last month said it would also investigate racism at Princeton University. Are you connecting dots here? Yale said the Justice Department claims are based on inaccurate statistics. Perhaps you are from the Johns Hopkins Center. and unfounded conclusions, and stated that Yale does not discriminate against applicants of any race or ethnicity. And it said our admissions practices are completely fair and lawful. Now, Yale's admission policies will not change as a result of the filing of this lawsuit, and we will look forward to defending these policies in court, according to the President, Peter Salovey. But the Justice Department Division of Civil Rights said in 2017 that it would redirect resources towards probing and suing universities over their affirmative action policies, and that it was part of a broader rightward shift the division has taken under President Trump. Now, they had made other sweeping changes to policies on civil rights enforcement, police reform and other areas. But the Justice Department had begun investigating Yale in 2018 based on a 2016 complaint which was filed with the Justice and Education Departments by a group of Asian American organizations. So the complaint was filed in 2016. They began investigating it in 2018, and here we are in 2020. I guess they don't move too quickly, do they? Now, the federal government threatened the suit back in August when it issued findings of a 2-year review of Yale's undergraduate admissions practices. And at the time, the Justice Department said Yale discriminated based on race and national origin, and that race was the determining factor in hundreds of admissions decisions each year. Common sense question. Is this an agency faction war, or is it cleaning the swamp? We're back. What are we doing? Race issues. It's not often we get round to covering the issues of the millions of Latinos in this country. But this report came in this week of how badly that they're struggling as well. And they're in a fairly dire crisis to do with their businesses and food insecurity. And it stated that 5 million Latinos are at risk of bankruptcy in a new study that was revealed on Sunday. And pre-pandemic, they were the fastest growing group on Main Street and contributed 4% to the US GDP. Now, Latino companies that applied for the Paycheck Protection Program have seen a 21% drop in revenue since February, while their costs for PPE and other safety measures have risen. Now, pre-pandemic, they were the fastest growing group, but with 5 million at a risk of bankruptcy, and their demise portends a troubling trend that can upend communities across America, according to the statistics. Now, with the costs of retrofitting their businesses to deal with the pandemic, which resulted in a huge amount of expenditure that exceeded their revenue in the summer, and they had to spend a lot just to stay open because of ridiculous regulations, and they ended it with a negative 11% margin, and they are now cash flow negative and are on the brink of going out of businesses. Now, the study, Biz2 Credit, analysed the financial performances of 35,000 companies, including 3,000 Hispanic-owned businesses that submitted funding requests through the company's online marketplace. And all the companies included in the survey have less than 250 employees and less than 10 million in annual revenue. And the report covered small businesses across the country in a wide range of industries, from start-ups to established companies. And construction was the largest category of business, representing near 18% of the Hispanic-owned companies in the study. And it also was followed by 16% services, accommodation and food services of 15%, retail 10%, and transportation and warehousing 8%. Now, the research conducted by Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative in May, and it's got worse since, found that 86% of Latino business owners surveyed reported immediate negative effects of the COVID-19 fake pandemic. And nearly 2/3 of respondents said they would likely be out of business in 6 months. 2/3 would be likely out of business in 6 months, and this was done in May, if COVID restrictions remain in place. Well, they have. And the study also found out that Latino business owners are nervous that customers might not feel confident enough to come back, and that many may not have money to pay for things. Now, as a group, Latinos are expected to comprise of almost 30% of the population by 2050 in America, compared to 18% today, and revenue of Latino-owned companies jumped 61% from 2017 to 2020. And they are a growing sector of the economy and contribute to its overall strength. But in 2020, they are struggling badly. A fairly sobering story, that. And this is why we are all in this together. And what was playing out here is the clown's version of Hunger Games, for those of you who have watched it. We are all pushed into districts, separated by colour, and we're all left to fight each other. But you know what happened in that series? Love won and ended the Hunger Games movie. And that is why coming together and loving each other will end this nonsense. This next piece is a fairly detailed expose of some of the fun and games going on to do with race again and who's involved in it. And I'm going to give credit to a Captain Joseph R. John for this piece. It's all his, with some of my comments added. And what he was talking about is the Sunrise Movement. Where have we heard that before? And it says, and why so many young white students are being recruited by them. The Sunrise Movement teaches students that white supremacy is the reason for systemic racism in the US, and that climate change is a white problem. And for 2 years, the left of centre liberal media establishment covered up the facts about the Sunrise Movement's recruiting and training programme. Now, the video, he outlines the 2-year behind-the-scenes training programme of white students on how to participate in race riots when an event triggers a race riot. And the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, is the true force behind the Sunrise Movement, Antifa and CAIR in Minnesota. Now, when Keith Ellison was the deputy chair of the Democrat Party, he moved the Democrat Party towards socialism, knowing that socialism is Marxist-inspired. It's actually communism, which is actually Zionism, and also socialism, and also fascism. It's all the same. just put it all in a bundle and replace it with Zionism, and then you've got the picture. Now, Keith Ellison is an Islam convert, and he called for a separate country for blacks in the US and wrote racist articles under his real name, Keith Hakim Mohammed. Oops. And the Muslim Brotherhood International Terrorist Organization paid for Keith Hakim Mohammed's pilgrimage to Mecca back in 2008. Ellison strongly supports Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam. Islam just means ISIS hidden. ISIS, Ra, El. And he has disrespect for the US Constitution, and he said its wording was inspired by the Bible. Ellison has also been close to the Communist Party USA, which is probably AIPAC, and held a fundraising event in the home of Minnesota Communist Party Chair Erwin Marquardt. Erwin. Perhaps our resident MeWe chat person can get a look at Erwin Marquardt. I'll have to check that up, whether it's born in, born to again. But Keith Ellison is a very close associate of Luis Enrique Marquez, who flies the communist flag and is the leader of Antifa in Portland's Rose City. Antifa rioters are the violent communist domestic terrorist foot soldiers, and the logo on the Antifa flag was created by the German Communist Party. Actually, it was Social Democrat Party. Democrats, same thing. And Ellison's photo is pictured on the internet holding the manual of the Antifa domestic terrorists, and their manual calls for uprising and riot in the US. Attorney General Keith Ellison is the de facto leader of Antifa and CAIR in Minnesota. Ilhan Omar, one of his creations, has the same campaign manager as him. And when George Floyd was killed by a rogue police officer, I'm not too sure he was, thought it was staged, employing improper restraint procedures, Antifa had the trigger it was waiting for to initiate race riots. Members of CAIR were present to film George Floyd's death outside Cup Foods in Minneapolis, and then CAIR distributed the video worldwide. And within 24 hours of Floyd's death, thousands of the Sunrise Movement trained rioters looted and torched Minneapolis as police officers stood down and let it burn. Now, CAIR organised the looters, Antifa organised the arsonists, Black Lives Matter led the rioters. And this was according to Real News Network Peggy Traeger Tierney, who wrote this on June the 16th, 2020, or that piece anyway, the information for that piece. And the chant from rioters was that police officers have been killing black youth to defund, eliminate and replace the police forces. Socialists, progressives, Marxists, communists and the Social Democrat Party mobilised rioters in 184 cities. Nazi sympathiser George Soros funded the riots. Keith Ellison's son, Jeremiah, who runs the Minneapolis City Council, pledged allegiance to Antifa and led the effort that eliminated the city's police department. By creating racial strife, Ellison allies hoped to defeat President Trump, then change the US constitutional republic to a socialist state. Antifa's revolutionary abolitionist movement have been leading the national effort to deface and destroy over 350 US historical monuments. Communists want Americans to believe they are divided by race. They are not. The only divide is communists versus free Americans. Now, combat veterans for Congress fight to protect and defend the US constitutional republic from domestic enemies and domestic terrorists. So thanks to Captain, what's his name, Joseph R. John for that report. And it's a fairly interesting article. But have we the people defined what is a republic? What is socialism? What is communism? All these labels, and too few just regurgitate the words without their own critical thinking applied to the process. And this is where we the people lack badly. You know, take the word communism in America. It's treated like the olden day lepers. Oh, we don't want communists, they're all Russian and Chinese. That is agency think tank programming. Period. And the fact that so many link it to those countries in 2020, despite the rise of the internet, is telling us we don't think for ourselves enough. Because communism, or communism, if applied correctly, and that's the important term, is actually the best form of government for we the people. Because it's all about fairness and sharing the life force energy. But the better version of that word is one from Tanakh, communalism. All about communities and all the people coming together. And all the rest of what you think about communism is your own non-thinking mindset and a set of narratives handed down to you by the media, agencies and politicians who wouldn't know a form of government if they fell over it. And for those who really wish to know what is communism, communism is Zionism, is Hebrew Anunnaki. It tells you that in the article. Who funded it? The George Soros Group. And George Soros is Jewish and Hebrew Anunnaki. Right, where are we next? Virus issues is our next topic. And the World Horror Organization, said to be for our health, and their special envoy on COVID-19 has urged world leaders this week to stop using lockdowns as your primary control method, and said we in the World Horror Organization do not advocate lockdowns as the primary means of control of this virus, according to Dr. David Nabarro, who spoke to the Spectator's Andrew Neil this week. And he said the only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganise, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. Funny enough, because all the hospitals are empty. But by and large, we would rather not do it. Now, Nabarro went on to point out several of the negative consequences lockdowns have caused across the world, including devastating tourism industries and increased hunger and poverty. He said, just look at what's happened to the tourism industry in the Caribbean, for example, or in the Pacific, because people aren't taking their holidays, he said. Look what's happened to the smallholder farmers all over the world. Look what's happening to the poverty levels. It seems that we may well have a doubling of world poverty by next year, and we may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition. Now, earlier this week, thousands of medical health experts signed their names to a petition calling for an end of the coronavirus lockdowns, citing the irreparable damage they've caused. And infectious disease epidemiologists and public health scientists, we have grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies and recommend an approach we call focused protection. Oh my, some common sense from the World Horror Organization. You best be careful or Facebook will close down your page as well. This next report is often overlooked, and so I thought I would add it in its entirety, and the impact on children this fake virus has created. And in an article recently where a mum of a nearly 5-year-old daughter wrote in to express concern that her child hasn't seen any friends in 5 months since the lockdowns began. And she said, because of COVID, my husband and I have decided to skip pre-K altogether and teach her everything she needs to know before kindergarten ourselves, which is probably the best anyway. And she said, this doesn't worry me academically, but I'm concerned about her development and the loss of social interaction she was going to experience. And the advice columnist responded that the mum shouldn't worry about her child's social isolation, saying she is part of a whole generation of quarantined 5-year-olds. Well, she go to take the same degree as Alan of Circle of White Light. What an overlook that is. It will take her a while to catch up once she re-enters society, sure, but it's going to take everyone a while. Really. Such crass and cold-hearted statements then. This resignation to ongoing government lockdowns, endless social distancing, mandatory mask orders and travel restrictions, even as the virus wanes in the US, is damaging to our social and economic health and may be particularly problematic for the children who are separated from their peers. Now, there is some evidence that suggests that young people are faring well outside of forced schooling. I'm not surprised that they're going to learn something. With less school-induced stress and anxiety, and the same research indicates that children and teens are missing their friends daily, and social isolation seems to be taking a toll. Now, with most large urban school districts planning remote learning only this fall, the isolation is likely to continue for many children unless parents step in to alleviate this loneliness. Now, an article in the Wall Street Journal exposed the impact of pandemic-related social isolation on children and adolescents. Of all age groups, this virus is probably more socially devastating to teens than any other group. They are bored and they are lonely, according to Joseph P. Allen, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. And another recent journal article reinforced these unintended consequences, and don't believe that for 1 minute. They were intended consequences. People were coming together and the frequency was going up, so they separated them and the frequency went down. This is what this whole thing is about. And the consequences of the lockdowns and social distancing on adolescents, and particularly girls. Adolescent girls already were experiencing record high levels of loneliness, anxiety and depression before the pandemic, according to Mary Pfeiffer, a clinical psychologist and author of Reviving Ophelia, Saving the Selves of Adolescent Girls, and said all of the things that a year ago were increasing girls' depression have been exacerbated by the pandemic, according to Dr. Pfeiffer. And she said kids need other kids, regardless of whether or not you think schools should reopen for in-person learning this fall. The reality is that kids need to be around other kids to play, socialise and learn. They don't need this play, socialising and learning to happen in schools. In fact, they may find much more authentic, satisfying social play and learning outside of a conventional classroom. In some ways, yeah. And Peter Gray, research professor of psychology at Boston College, has written extensively on the importance of unstructured childhood social play for children's health and their well-being. And in a June interview, Gray said, "Play is crucial to children's development, and much of my research shows that over the last few decades our children have been very play deprived." Absolutely. And they spend so much time in school, so much time on homework after school, so much time in adult-directed activities which are not fully play. Play is activity that children develop themselves, that children take control of themselves, and their children learn to be independent and solve their own problems. Absolutely. You've got to remember, 100 and so years ago, the children left school at 13 and were 1,000 times more intelligent than our current children. Now it's 18. What are they learning in the extra 5 years? Well, clearly nothing. Gray went on, if they are play deprived prior to the pandemic, then many children may be more play deprived now, as they have been cut off from peers for now nearly 6 months. And he documented the correlation between the decline in play and the rise in childhood and adolescent mental health disorders. And this is something that is deeply concerning now, as children, and especially adolescents, are even more distant from their peers. And it says, whilst technology has been a lifesaver for all of us during the pandemic, it has also consumed a much larger portion of children's lives. And a new report released this month by the Children's Hospital of Chicago found that 63% of teens are using social media more than they did pre-pandemic, and more than half of their parents indicate that social media use is having a negative impact on their kids. But perhaps more startling, the survey found that 68% of parents say that social media is interfering with their teens' ability to have normal social interactions. That's because of the programming in it, particularly in Facebook. And concerns about social media use and its impact on teen mental and social health were widespread before the pandemic, but it could be particularly troubling now as social media use soars while many teens remain separated from their friends. It's a big problem. You know, I don't think they're losing out academically at all, because school has proven to teach absolute zero. I had a discussion about this recently, how people can't add up without a machine, don't understand basic math, can't spell properly, can't read properly, don't use phonetics, can't pronounce words properly either. And they're your basics in life. If you can't add up or do basic math, read or write properly, you're going to struggle the rest of your life. So the schools shut down. Personally, I would shut them all down. But we need to have a replacement and come up with a proper curriculum that's going to expand and be of interest for child development, not child bots, where we teach them manners again, as that's been lost recently. Respect for others, which then brings in the racism and the sexism and all the other rubbish. Caring and sharing, need not greed. It's all like the cooperative model. where people learn to cooperate and play together without doing harm to each other, competing against each other unnecessarily. We can teach how to meditate, better reforms of people who misbehave than giving them a whack. But somewhere along the line we have to fix this education problem and turn it into a teaching program that's going to be healthy for all children. It's a massive problem in this country. Massive, far more than people realise. And hopefully some good things will come out of this. But the competing with each other in classrooms is not good either. So there is some benefits to the shutdown, and maybe when they all come back together they will all care for each other more and not compete. Still on the virus, a British study has found 86% of people infected with the virus didn't show the main symptoms on the day that they were actually tested. Oops. And researchers at University College London looked at data from a survey that has been testing thousands of UK households every week, regardless of whether the subjects had symptoms. And the study that was released on Thursday looked at data for 36,061 people between April and June, and researchers found among those who tested positive, 86% didn't have a cough, fever, or loss of taste or smell. Oops. That's almost the same figure as the 90% false positive, is it not? And the lead researcher, Irene Peterson, said that while people may have had symptoms in the days before the test or developed them later, the study suggests that many may be spreading the virus while asymptomatic. And she says frequent and widespread testing of all individuals is needed to curb the silent transmission. No, it's not, because the problem is the test. Lead researcher, my ass. This is from a section out of what Q posted this week, which is fairly interesting. And so what it stated was the total American deaths, all causes, for the last 3 years. Now, in 2017, the total deaths was 2.813 million, or 234,000 a month. In 2018, the total deaths were 2.839, or 237,000 a month. In 2019, 2.855 million, or 238,000 a month. 2020, January up until the week ending 9/26, 2.13 million, which is 236,000 a month, which is 2,000 a month more than 2017, 1,000 less than 2018, and 2,000 less per month than 2019. So the projected figures would be 236,000, 2.838 million, which is less than 2018 and 2019. And then Q said, why did the Democratic governors push C19 infected patients into nursing homes? I'm glad they're finally covering what we exposed many, many months ago. And what are the percentages of total C19 deaths attributed to nursing homes? Who is most susceptible? And the same Democratic governors who pushed C19 infected patients into nursing homes attempting to keep state or states closed. Why? Asked Q. And that is fine, Q, but what are you doing about it? Pain is coming, you said, and you were right. But was it for the people, not the clowns? And what everyone is asking Q is, where are? Right, it's going to get a bit more heavier here on in. There was a load of drops of Hillary Clinton emails recently. And one of them, dated Tuesday, January the 25th, 2011 at 3:28 p.m, was sent to Huma Abedin, Barack Obama, John Podesta, yes, I pronounced that correctly, Ben Affleck, and Nancy Pelosi. And it said, Dear Barack, when we began the pizza arrangement, I thought we were going to be more careful than this. Operating from the White House is not what I originally had in mind. And remember that the hot dogs can come, but if you make a spectacle out of it, that will be our downfall. Please know that I'm speaking as a friend. You are the president and you can do as you like. But I have to say I think it would be wiser to restrict this activity to our predetermined locations. Let me know what everyone thinks. We can vote on it if you like. Thanks. Anne, or Hillary. I assume all now know what the code words are for pizza and hot dogs now, and the links to pedophilia and ritual practices. But to those who doubt that, here is a common sense question. Why would the Secretary of State ask the President about having pizza and hot dogs in the White House require a warning and a vote? That email is now 9 years old, a bit like Eric Holder in Fast and Furious. And where are the arrests of not only the perpetrators, but those who were aware of this criminality and have proceeded to cover it up for nearly a decade? It has gone on in this administration, and there's still no funeral for Jeffrey Epstein. No further words on Ghislaine Maxwell. Will she die in mysterious circumstances as well and be transported like Epstein to Israel? But what about the brave victims who came forward? Where is the justice for them? Right, here we go. I watched the podcast this week and did some investigations myself. And this is what I came up with. And the podcast was by Jason Goodman and his guest David Watkins. Now, Goodman asked me to go on his show and expose Robert David Steele a while back, after Steele issued him and his co-hosts with a $6 million each lawsuit. 6 million being the operative figure, Goodman being Jewish. Now, Goodman is no different to many other alt media and is connected to faction-based elements, and that are revealed in that podcast if you listen closely. And this was called Bowing to Facebook. And it details about a person in British Columbia called Cameron Otis, who is a spy inside the Five Eyes organisation, who was fast-tracked into the Director of Intelligence for the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and is also connected heavily to the Asian faction, which to all intents and purposes runs Vancouver, British Columbia and beyond in Canada via gang warfare and foreign and domestic agency-based tactics. Now, Otis was also involved with the Blackberries connected to the Hillary Clinton Benghazi and other investigations, and there's a company called Phantom Secure directly involved with the backdoor BlackBerry phones in Richmond, British Columbia, which is the same location as Cameron Otis. Now, Watkins spoke in agency-based terms of parallel narratives and compromised nodes, and they focused on Otis's thesis, which is called Bowing to Queerness, Quirinus. And the topic was compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia. And in that thesis there is a line, and the line states the future to the past, which explains the two-headed god Janus or Quirinus. And in the Q drops, the future proves the past is often relayed as one of their key nodes in their drops of information. And it exposed compromised nodes like we did with the Swiss banker story last week. It's in last week's show, where the CIA got him drunk and made him drive home, and then he gets stopped and the CIA saved the day of his arrest on the premise he became an informant for them. That's a compromised node. Now, there are other examples in the alt media. Field McConnell, Abel Danger, which is a name of a CIA project, George Webb, who is Mossad, Neil Keenan, and possibly Drake, plus several other alt media personalities who the agencies have leverage over for certain indiscretions done by the node, as they are called. And with persuasion and coercion by agencies, they then become a compromised node within the network, and subsequently they are working for the system, not the people. Now, it's stated that 9/11 was used in parallel narratives also, which was the drill that was taking place at exactly the same time as the event, and using compromised nodes in key positions to carry it out. And from all accounts, the 9/11 attack was launched out of British Columbia, Canada. And it spoke about the BBC. The BBC were almost wetting themselves with joy that Facebook had banned QAnon. Why? Because the BBC is run by MI5, MI6, along with GCHQ and elements of the Blue Dragon Group, which is an opposite faction of Trump and subsequently QAnon. And essentially what they're saying is this, that QAnon and the opposition are all part of a Five Eyes agency-based cyber war game, being ran against each other, it seems, but quite possibly against we the people as well, in a double cross motion. Now, other compromised nodes involved the BBC London, New York and British Columbia again, involving the child sex scandals. The BBC had Jimmy Savile, his counterpart in New York was Jeffrey Epstein, and in British Columbia you have Christopher Charles Ingvildson, who is charged with and jailed for child pornography, who is a close friend and roommate of Justin Trudeau. And so you see the network begins to connect some dots. London, New York and Vancouver are all British OSS espionage and double agents sites that has gone on for a long time against the people of the UK, Canada and also America. Now, in Cameron Ortis's thesis, Bowing to Quirinus, who is Quirinus? Well, Quirinus is represented by a double-headed statue, and so is two-faced, double-crossing. The double cross is XX in Roman numerals. Double cross, double agent. 10 and 10 and double ones and zeros, indicating controlled opposition of two sides of the same coin. Now, Quirinus is a Roman god and has a statue in the Vatican with a number on its base. That number is 17. The 17th letter is Q. Coincidence? You decide. So is it bowing to Quirinus, the Roman god, or bowing to Q, the Internet Information Data Package, or one and the same? But as they are suggesting in this podcast, if Q is connected to British Canadian agencies, it fully explains the piece I did recently about Q doing British spellings in his post. Oops. And the gist of the narrative was that QAnon is another agency-based honeypot tactic to pull the people in, document them all via metadata and algorithms, and then log them into a database. Once that database is established, those on it have the potential to become target individuals. That is how it works. But the problem is, and what I stated 2 years back, when I stated it didn't matter whether Q was agency or not, as it is getting lots of people to do their own research, and that was a good thing. But, and it's a big but, too many jumped on it, and it became out of control of the system. And so now the system has to shut it down, which also has the propensity to make Q look legitimate. It's the compromised parallel narrative game again, when it is more likely a mass public psyop. Now, people make the mistake with several alt media outlets that because they are exposing public figures, that somehow they are working and doing it for the benefit of the people. You have no idea of how wrong that thinking is. Also in the same podcast, and I did some investigating myself again, there was something called the Trump Project, and is the next part we wish to cover tonight based on the analysis of the aforementioned video. Is this Donald Trump related? Question mark. Possibly, you decide. But are there ever natural coincidences within the 3D loop reality process? One has to ask. This was a document produced in 2002 called the Trump Project, and it has a picture of 4 playing cards, one from each suit, with 4 words, one on each card. The first card is trial, with TR highlighted. The second card is usability, with U highlighted. The third card is maturity, with M highlighted. And the fourth card is process, with the P highlighted. TRUMP. And so it spells Trump. And what the documentation says, the Trump Project has successfully raised the usability maturity of 2 large organizations and is providing information to help other organizations achieve similar results. But the point is, who are the 2 large organizations and the other organizations involved? Is it Rothschilds and Black Sun, or is it the UK and America, or is it Quirinus, the 2-headed Roman god? Now the next states the objectives of the Trump Project. Trial. Trump has trialled a number of techniques to improve the human-centeredness of 2 large organizations' IT development processes. And the trial was part funded by the European Commission as ESPRIT Project 28015 Trump, as part of a program called Horizon 2020. But remember, this document was from 2002. Usability. Usability is the quality of a system in use and is the ultimate objective of the IT development. Truly usable IT systems are the result of human-centered development process. And one has to ask, was this the start of the computer network data collection that has run rampant since? Maturity. Developing usable systems requires a human-centered approach by all those involved in design and development, as well as the integration of human-centered design and elevation, or evaluation, I should say, activities throughout the development methodology. And it says Trump has raised the usability maturity of the trial organizations. Process. Trump showed how user-centered methods could be integrated into the development process of the 2 participating organizations. Trump will enable the organizations to adopt the techniques more widely. In other words, a merging of 2 separate entities into one giant IT harvesting center is what they're telling you. So who was involved in this process? Well, some familiar names and entities will crop up in this section. The Trump project involved 3 partners and 1 subcontractor. Serco Usability Services coordinated the project and provided the usability expertise to the user partners IR and IAI. Lloyd's Register provided independent assessment of the usability maturity before and after the application at IR. So who are these people? Serco Usability Services. Pin your ears back and listen closely. Previously at the National Physical Laboratory, has been developing and applying practical human-centered evaluation and design techniques for many years. It was the coordinating partner for Trump and was the project's source of expertise in human-centered techniques. So, who are Serco? Oh dear, get ready. Well, Serco are a large private contractor ran for and by the agencies. As a private contractor, while still affiliated with agencies, they can circumnavigate around government restrictions and oversight. Serco was founded in 1929 as RCA Services Limited, a United Kingdom division of the Radio Corporation of America, and initially provided services to the cinema industry. So in other words, RCA was a subsidiary of the OSS, as we covered in the From Russia with Love series, and it shows you how far back the espionage, disinformation and propaganda operations have been run in this country. Now, following the takeover of RCA by another clown group, General Electric, in 1985, RCA Services Limited was bought out by its local management and changed its name to Serco in 1987. Serco is essentially the British government. They run practically all the UK government services, and here is a list of the services of various sectors they run in the UK: border security, work pensions, transport, science, prison and justice, housing, defence, aviation, health, education, leisure, IT and waste and recycling services. Just in the UK alone. And if you think that is bad enough and all very cartel-like, try their USA services for good measures. They run and own the parking meters in Chicago. They manage the Affordable Care Act for a total of $1.25 billion and are the classification for all US patents. They also run the driving test and exams in Ontario, Canada. They run several prisons in Australia and New Zealand. They run transport systems in Australia, Hong Kong, Dubai, Denmark and Sweden, and have offshore holdings on the Isle of Mauritius. Oops. Quite a climb up the ladder from a radio company, that, is it not? So they're the first participants in this Trump project. The second one is Inland Revenue. It's the tax collection department of the UK government with over 60,000 staff. Inland Revenue relies on IT for administrative support. Because they must implement government tax policy, Inland Revenue must be able to implement new business systems rapidly and correctly. Now, the Inland Revenue in the UK and the IRS are both connected to via the Crown and subsequently the Bank of England and also the Federal Reserve. All one system. The third partner, IAI, Israel Aircraft Industries, design and build aircraft and avionics equipment. IAI has a reputation for efficiency and quality in the techniques introduced by Trump. The project improved their development efficiency and the quality of the products. Oh dear. Is there ever any show without including the Israelis? And clearly they wish to mix IT and war for their pilots. The final participant was Lloyd's Register, who performed independent assessment of the usability maturity of the Inland Revenue both before and after the introduction of the human-centered techniques. I keep using that term. Now, Lloyd's is a banking and insurance group of investors with much ill repute, particularly during the 2008-2009 economic crisis. Now, the documents for this Trump project were produced by a company called Citeer X, CITESEERX, by Nigel Bevan and Neil Kerson, who both then worked for Serco as well. Now, the documents for this Trump project are a copyright of Pennsylvania State University, of all places, proving what we have stated in previous shows, that these universities are fronts for agency and spy and espionage-based operations, both foreign and domestic. Now, two things stand out in their narrative. Extended abstracts on human factors in computing systems was one, and then it states the tutorial presents a structured approach to user-centered design based on the principles of the forthcoming international standard human-centered design processes for interactive systems. All sounds very artificial intelligence to me. But this shows potentially how far back these think tanks plan ahead. That a 2002 document that names a future US president that was funded by a group called Horizon 2020 all leaves much to ponder on. I've said all along, we the people have to be careful of who we follow and trust. Is this the card game version of the chess game played out by Q? And if so, by playing the trump card in this, what or who is Trump trumping? And what if Trump is a compromised node in an IT-based network ran out of British Columbia? Thunderstruck indeed. I've pondered during that music whether to put the last piece in. It was actually an original in the show. I've rewrote the show 3.5 times this week. Left pieces out, moved pieces around. But it's something that's really covered. And those last two pieces were added in the third rewrite once I'd finished investigating for myself. And And so we're going to go into this final piece. And it's something that rarely gets covered, and it's unpleasant. But we've never shied away from stories, this group, that many others do. And it's about ritual abuse. And it will get covered in more detail in a coming up soon show. But ritual abuse exists all over the world. And there have been reports, journal articles, web pages and criminal convictions of crimes against children and adults. And it has obvious associations with mind control programs such as MKUltra and its derivatives, which is the Milgram experiment, together with the whole gamut of associations summarised by the terms pedophocracy and VI, pedophile, VIP. Now, the origins of those terms, Larry Pazda introduced the term ritualized abuse in 1980, describing the experiences of an adult survivor that was disclosing satanic abuse memories. And he defined the phenomenon as repeated physical, emotional, mental and spiritual assaults combined with a systematic use of symbols, ceremonies and machinations designed and orchestrated to attain malevolent effects. Now, later definitions came mostly from professionals addressing ritual abuse in child care settings. Finkelhor, Williams, Burns and Kalinowski elaborated on Pazda's definition, defining ritual abuse as abuse that occurs in a context linked to some symbols or group activity that have a religious, magical or supernatural connotation, and where the invocation of these symbols or activities are repeated over time and used to frighten and intimidate the children. Of course, we covered this in From Russia with Love 8A or 8C about the mandalas, because they are used in these events. Now, Kelly referred to ritual abuse as the repetitive and systematic sexual, physical and psychological abuse of children by adults as part of a cult or satanic worship. Now, there is a great deal of evidence supporting the existence of ritual abuse crimes as a worldwide phenomenon, and Bottoms, Shaver and Goodman found in their 1993 study evaluating ritual abuse claims that in 2,292 alleged ritual abuse cases, 15% of the perpetrators in adult cases and 30% of the perpetrators in child cases confessed to the abuse. Now, in a survey of 2,709 members of the American Psychological Association, it found that 30% of these professionals had seen cases of ritual or religion-related abuse. And that was done in 1991. And of those psychologists who have seen cases of ritual abuse, 93% of them believe that the reported harm took place, and 93% believe that the alleged ritualism actually occurred. Now, a similar research of Nancy Perry, 1992, which further supports the previous findings, Perry also conducted a national survey of therapists, or the rapists, who work with clients with dissociative disorders, and she found that 88% of the 1,185 respondents indicated belief in ritual abuse involving mind control and programming. Now, recently, an online survey of over 1,000 people answered questions about ritual abuse and extreme abuse crimes, And in the summary of the survey, it was found that ritual abuse mind control is a global phenomenon, and 55% stated they were abused in a satanic cult. 77% of the adult survivors that responded had been threatened with death if they ever talked about the abuse. Also, 257 respondents reported that secret mind control experiments were used on them as children. 82% reported being sexually abused by multiple perpetrators. That's the Monarch program. Now, Ann Johnson Davis, in her book Hell -1, reported that her parents confessed to her abuse in writing and verbally to the clergyman and to the detectives from the Utah Attorney General's office. No surprise it was Utah. You have no idea how prevalent that is in that state. And her suppressed memories started when she was in her mid-30s, which were fully substantiated by her mother and stepfather. And many scientific journals or articles have discussed the reality of ritual abuse and its effect on its victims. Now, some of the articles have discussed the extreme nature of these crimes, the proof of the reality of the ritual abuse phenomenon, and victims' symptoms, and the connection between ritual abuse, multiple personality disorder, and mind control, and also the connections between ritual abuse reports and the higher levels of symptoms of childhood sexual and physical abuse. Several additional studies and organisations have compiled research on the reality of ritual abuse crimes, and ritual abuse and mind control crimes have also been confirmed in other books. Now, a study which identified 270 cases of sexual abuse in a daycare setting found that allegations of ritual abuse occurred in 13% of the cases, which means the rest of it was covered up. Additional evidence of ritual abuse in daycare and child abuse cases have been found in news reports, journal articles, and also legal transcripts. Now, the ritual abuse occurrences have also been heavily found not only in America, but in Holland and England. And reports of ritual abuse have also been found in multiple personality disorder sufferers. That's the mind control. It splits the mind into 7 to 12 parts. I know, I lived with one for the best part of 6 years. The alters. And this type of skullduggery is the hidden cancer on this planet in many ways. Children born in military families are particularly prone to this, which is what happened to Chloe. But there's a number of others that are in the alt media, a high proportion of lead speakers who have all been in the programs. And again, like I said, we'll cover that more in another show. But Kemp believes that the intergenerational satanic accounts are possible, and that rituals related to them may come from a deviant interpretation of, quote, religious texts, unquote. And yes, a lot of this is connected to religiosity. In fact, some would argue it all does. And others have stated that the theories and research around recovered memory strongly confirms the reality of cult abuse of SRA survivors. And then we have the muddying of the waters of how people try to cover it up. The abuse of children, whatever the apparent motives of the abusers, involves such a gross betrayal of trust and is so abhorrent to the mass of any population that it can be very difficult to approach the subject in a completely detached and rational manner. And that's how they get away with it, you see. That's why I've chosen to put this in, because others won't. Oh, I don't want to hear about that. It's the same as the pedophilia when it first started. I was telling people about royals in the churches back in the late 1980s and 90s. I don't want to hear about that. Well, you're going to, because that's the way to stop it. It has to come out of the dark and into the light. And it's said of all human vices and perversions, pedophilia is seen as probably the most shameful and outrageous in the public mind, and the transition to branding it as sort of occult evil is therefore more or less inevitable when religious overtones are added. And this is the problem again with the religious. They'll overlook it because that's not possible, you see. It's we're godly and we're this and we're that. Wrong. It's where it came from. The church. And people can rail at me all they like, but those are the facts. This is why I did what I did with From Russia with Love, exposing the church on all levels and the damage it has done to we the people. It thus has vast potential as a source of Machiavellian manipulation and control on the one hand, and witch hunts by overzealous but ostensibly well-meaning authorities on the other. This is where they muddy the waters, as the report says. Anything to shut it down. Now, this was a brief discussion of the latter as applied to the UK, as follows. Overtly religious forms of ritual abuse seem to have been first recognised as a serious issue in the US back in 1972 with the publication of From Witchcraft to Christ. Oh my, what a title that is. And it's correct in many ways. Again, people are not going to like me saying that, but go and research yourself with an open mind. And that book was written by Doreen Irvine, and the autobiography of a former high priestess of Satan, describing events alleged to have happened in England. This is why the judges all wear the black robes. They are high priests and high priestesses, and they're involved in it as well. And it stated many Satanists would be present, about 800 or more. All meetings included awful scenes of perverted sexual acts, and my ability to levitate 4 to 5 feet was real, she said. It was not a hoax. The demons aided me to do that. And like I've stated previously, all magic is done by the dark, and it only gives the illusion that you performed it. You have to dance with the dark for it to take place. Now, after the book's publication, US police investigated and dismissed more than 10,000 complaints. Though let's not forget they have a predisposition to dismiss where powerful interests are involved. But also they're connected to the Freemasons or the Fraternity Brotherhood, who are also involved in this, because it goes back to Egypt again, and the modern day Israel. And the scare was then brought to England by Doreen Irvine in April and September 1988. MP Geoffrey Dickens warned of the prevalence of satanic child abuse, claiming up to 50 young children a year were being murdered, and the rest. And his evidence included the increasing demand for occult books in libraries, the popularity of black magic videos, and the spread of New Age shops. Oh dear. Now, the well-known BBC TV Cook Report had an episode on Devil's Work on the 17th of July 1989, and social work conferences were held, particularly one at Reading University in September of 89 on the theme of Not One More Child. Now, belief in the danger of satanic rituals quickly became very widespread amongst social workers. More than 50 children in England and Scotland were removed from their homes on the grounds that their parents were practicing Satanists. And after investigations lasting up to 4 years, all charges were dropped, and all the children supposedly abused by Satanists were allowed back home. This is where they do the cover-up. And one of the cases that seems to have triggered the scare was a case in Nottingham, where sex parties involving children under the age of 7. 27 young children were put into care, and in February 1989, 8 male members of the family and a family friend were imprisoned. Now, a social worker arranged for the new foster mothers of these children to be briefed by the Americans Jerry Simondal and Pamela Klein, and the children began to recall satanic rituals. In Trafford, Manchester, 2 sisters who had been abused were taken into care in October of 89 and were, according to the report, coaxed by experts. No, they weren't coaxed at all. And after 3 months they started telling stories of witch parties which they had attended, with babies and animals killed and blood being drank. 11 more children were taken into care, and it said an innocent man was arrested in January of 1990. The children were then held for a further 10 months until a High Court judge ordered their release, and the Social Services Department accepted criticism of their methods. So what this is saying is the social workers were being briefed on this satanic abuse, reporting on it, and then because it came out too much, the authorities slapped it down and then criticised social services on their methods and misstated that they were coaxing the children to come up with fake stories. What bollocks that is. And a case in Rochdale in November 1989 did not involve any real abuse, but after months of interviews, a frightened boy and his dreaming sister were persuaded, it said, to implicate still more families. Utter rubbish. Now, 10 children remained in custody until a 47-day High Court hearing exposed the evidence as ridiculous in March 1991. And there involves the Justice Department, who are involved in the same thing. Judges are high priests. Now, the following day, after that, the Director of Social Services for Rochdale resigned. And 2 social workers who had done some of their own research on satanic abuse were transferred. This is what they do. Now, eventually, Professor Jean Lafontaine of LSE was commissioned to study the affair in England and Wales, and some of the Scottish cases were said to be even more alarming. However, there is only a judicial report on the case in Orkney, and in 1998 Lafontaine blamed the spread of satanic abuse stories on the evangelical Christian movement and on professional specialists, American and British, purveying unreliable information. So in comes the authority over the authority to try and squash it all out. It's protecting the higher people. They'll throw people under the bus, but they'll always protect the higher people. Well, with the likes of this, we're exposing them. Well, this is all part of the great cover-up practice, and discrediting the children and the staff is a common practice. They won't touch anything that's not classed as normal. And the first thing is to declare the children with a mental disorder. No, they have an abuse issue. And this is far more common than people would like to believe happens, and yet again involves the groups designated to look after the people: churches, hospitals, police, judges, etc., etc., as the vehicles with which to damage us. You cannot forgive if you don't forgive yourself. You cannot trust if you don't trust yourself. You cannot fully care for others if you don't care for yourself. You cannot think for others if you don't think for yourself. You cannot soothe anger if you don't restrain your own. You cannot heal your inner if you continue to project outer. You cannot request change if you don't change yourself. Ascension is an inner process, not an external. You cannot hope to achieve high consciousness with lower vibrational actions and thinking. You cannot heal the planet if you haven't healed yourself. You cannot love if you don't love yourself. Not loving yourself leads to a heart of stone, and the Excalibur air sword we all have the potential of holding only becomes a self-cutting tool. What has taken place this year is a clear, defined split of the people. Within the masses, there is the thinkers and non-thinkers, the non-mask wearers and the non-thinking mask wearers. In the US, the division is multifolded, divided by Republican or Democrat, white or black, left or right, grey or straight, Christian or none, and the list goes on. In the world of finance, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. In the world of mainstream media, the gap between fact and fiction got wider. In the alt media also. But the alt media also added another division between those who chase the money and the subsequent saviour programmes and those who work on themselves and save each other. It's a daily practice now of clowns and their agents to try and throw me off track and change the focus. people trying to bait me, undercover agents using lies and distortions trying to goad me. Well, you know what? It failed. And the question to the people who do this is, why are you failing yourself? If we are not over the target or on the correct path, why is so many copying our methods and ideas? THI is now isolated like the clowns and their paid agents want it. We are an island in a cesspool of bullshittery. Wear it proud. Continue to work on the self and help others. Unity, solidarity and loyalty to each other wins. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to